The morning of Richard Shaw's funeral was colder than expected for late October in Pennsylvania. The air carried a stillness that made everything feel heavier, as if the world itself was mourning. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day. Not because I didn't already own black dresses, but because every other one held memories, weddings, concerts, celebrations. This one had no meaning. It was sterile, like the grief I was expected to perform for the distant relatives and neighbors who would silently judge how well I was holding up. The house felt too big without Richard in it. 32 years of marriage, and now I was alone in a 5-bedroom colonial that echoed with absence. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, like something had been removed violently from the fabric of my life. My children Michael, Clara, and Ethan hadn't been around much in the final weeks. They said they were busy. Work deadlines, travel plans, family obligations. I told myself I understood. After all, I'd raised them to be independent. I just hadn't realized I'd also raised them to be strangers. At the Eternal Light Chapel, Richard lay in the casket we had picked out together 20 years earlier, during one of those oddly calm conversations couples have when they accept the inevitability of death. He looked peaceful, younger, even, as though dying had erased the stress lines that had etched deeper into his face during the long fight with pancreatic cancer. I sat in the front row, glancing at my watch, 10 minutes before the service, and my children were still nowhere to be seen. The chapel filled with colleagues, neighbors, old friends. But the only people who mattered most hadn't arrived. Not yet. I heard the soft click of heels before I saw them. Claire's voice floated up behind me, polite and composed. "Mom." I turned to see the three of them, Michael in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, Claire in designer heels and a crisp black coat, Ethan with his beard trimmed perfectly, wearing the watch Richard gave him when he graduated veterinary school. They walked together like a boardroom delegation. Professional, prepared. Michael leaned down to kiss my cheek. His cologne was sharp, expensive. "We need to talk after the service," he murmured. "About Dad's arrangements. Practical matters." Practical matters, as if that's what death boiled down to. I nodded and squeezed his hand. Told myself it was just grief making things feel cold. Told myself they meant well, that they were trying to be helpful. The service blurred by familiar hymns, strangers' condolences, and a pastor who barely knew Richard reciting safe, general phrases about a man of quiet strength. I waited, half expecting one of my children to stand and share something real, a story, a memory, a piece of the man they once called Dad. Instead, Michael walked to the podium with the ease of someone used to presenting numbers and outcomes. Claire and Ethan flanked him like they'd practiced. "Our father believed in legacy," Michael began, "in providing for the people he loved." I felt a flicker of pride. Maybe this would be the moment they honored him properly. "He made it clear to us," Claire added, "that everything he built, his business, investments, properties, should stay in the family, managed by those who understood his vision." And then Ethan spoke the words that cracked something deep inside me. "He left everything to us. Our mother will be well taken care of. From a distance." The words hung in the air like smoke, visible, heavy, unmistakable. From a distance. I felt the shift in the room. Some eyes glanced toward me, others looked away. The implication was clear. I was no longer central. I was an obligation to be managed, funded, and forgotten from afar. But what my children didn't know, what not a single person in that chapel knew, was that Richard and I had planned for this. Every clause, every dollar, every possibility. We'd started working on our estate plans nearly a year before his diagnosis. Richard had seen how easy it was for families to unravel after a death. He'd seen people forget what mattered. He didn't want that for us. Or maybe he knew something I didn't. Maybe he sensed the distance that had quietly grown between us and our children. During those months when the kids were too busy to visit, I sat beside Richard in meeting after meeting. We consulted lawyers, reviewed documents, created trusts, we planned for contingencies, and then we revised them, twice. We weren't just organizing assets. We were preparing a lesson. A week after the funeral, I found myself in the lawyer's office, sitting across from James Whitman, the estate attorney we'd worked with for over a decade. I watched him organize the thick folder containing Richard's final will, and I thought about the folder I'd found in Richard's closet, labeled in his familiar handwriting, Meredith Security. Inside were copies of every document, every statement, every decision we'd made together. Not for show, not to control, but to protect. As James turned to greet my children in the waiting room, I could already see it in their faces, the quiet satisfaction of assuming the empire had fallen into their hands. They were wrong. And they were about to find out just how wrong. The conference room was far too large for 4 people. A polished oak table stretched down the center, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the gray waters of the river, choppy beneath the fall wind. I took my seat at the head of the table, the seat Richard would have taken. James Whitman entered, his expression unreadable. He offered a brief condolence, then opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. "Before we begin," he said, "please understand this document reflects Richard's final, legally binding wishes, witnessed and prepared under full compliance with Pennsylvania state law." Michael nodded confidently. Claire uncapped a pen, her legal pad already filled with neat bullet points. Ethan shifted in his seat but stayed silent. James began. As expected, the will opened with a summary of Richard's estate, the house, business shares, vehicles, retirement accounts, investment properties. Everything was to be distributed to our 3 children, Michael Shaw, Claire Shaw Hamilton, and Ethan Shaw jointly, to manage as they saw fit. Michael smiled. Claire made a small check mark on her notepad. Then James continued. There are, however, key conditions to these inheritances. The room tensed. No one said a word. First, James said, all distributions to the children are contingent upon their continued care and support of their mother, Meredith Shaw, for the remainder of her natural life. This includes, but is not limited to, housing of her choice, full medical coverage, and a monthly allowance of no less than $8,000. Michael sat upright. Claire's pen paused mid-word. Ethan stared, blinking as if trying to process what he had just heard. Second, James continued, should any of the beneficiaries attempt to place Mrs. Shaw into institutional care against her wishes, or fail to meet these obligations, their individual share will be forfeited and redirected to a list of designated charitable organizations. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Her legal training battled visibly with her disbelief. Third, James said, a separate trust of $500,000 has been established under Meredith Shaw's sole control, to be used at her discretion. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. And finally, James said, unfolding a sealed envelope, Richard requested this letter be read aloud. He read the first line. My dear children, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and the truth is now in your hands. I hope you are surprised. I hope you were shocked. And most of all, I hope you finally understand that the woman you tried to discard is the very woman who made everything in your lives possible. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. The days after the will reading were eerily quiet. No phone calls, no visits, just silence thick enough to press against the walls. On the third morning, Michael called. Mom, he began, his voice stiff, we need to talk about your living situation. The house is too big for one person. The upkeep, the utilities. I'm not discussing anything until we finalize the estate process, I replied, calm but firm. I know this is emotional, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. But Dad was very clear. We want to make this transition smooth for you. Transition. As if my life were a department being restructured. The next day, Claire called. She got straight to the point. We've looked at some assisted living communities in Westover. Very reputable, safe, social programming. I'm 58, Claire. Well, not now, of course, she rushed to add, but Dad wanted us to plan ahead. Independence matters, but so does security. There was that word again, security, a word they'd wrapped in politeness but used like a leash. Ethan's call came last. His voice was gentler, hesitant. Mom, I know this isn't easy, but Dad really did want what's best for you. He talked to us before things got worse. He was worried about you being alone. And what did you tell him? I asked. That we'd take care of you, that you wouldn't have to worry about anything. Take care of me, like a chore. Like a stray cat they agreed to feed but wouldn't bring inside. A week passed. I spent it combing through Richard's office, organizing documents, sorting files. I knew every account, every number, every asset by heart now. Then, one morning at exactly 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Michael's luxury sedan gleaming in the driveway. He stood on my porch with a bouquet of white roses, my favorite, though I doubted he remembered that on his own. "Mom," he said when I opened the door. "I brought flowers. May I come in?" I stepped aside. The performance was beginning. Michael sat on the edge of the living room sofa, still holding the bouquet awkwardly. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his polished shoes tapped against the rug. "I want to apologize," he began. "What we said at the funeral, it wasn't fair. We were grieving. We weren't thinking clearly." "You were thinking," I said, settling into Richard's old recliner. "You were thinking about how to manage the problem of your mother. Efficiently." He flinched, just slightly. "That's not true," he said quickly. "We were looking out for you." "My best interests," I replied. "According to you." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket. "We've drafted a care schedule. Claire, Ethan, and I will rotate responsibilities: groceries, appointments, home maintenance. You'll never feel alone." I took the paper and read it. It was exactly what I expected corporate thinking applied to family. Bullet points, delegated duties, checklists. Not love, not remorse. Management. "And the $8,000 monthly stipend?" I asked, still scanning the page. "We'll set up a transfer. Automatic. First of every month. We're working out how to divide it. You don't know yet who will carry the larger burden." "It's a lot of money, Mom. Over time, it adds up." "Yes," I said, folding the paper and placing it on the table. "Your father and I did the math. Nearly $4 million over 40 years. Don't you think that's excessive?" He didn't say it, but I could feel it in his voice. "Can you possibly be worth that much?" "You'll find," I said quietly, "that justice rarely comes at a discount." Before he could respond, the front door opened. "Mom?" Claire called from the hallway. "Michael's car is outside. Are you both in here?" And just like that, the delegation had arrived. Claire entered first, still dressed in her work suit, briefcase in one hand, a paper bag in the other. "I brought cinnamon rolls," she said, lifting the bag with a forced smile. "From Kennedy's Bakery. Do you used to get them every Sunday?" I did. For 18 years, every Sunday morning without fail. Until they all moved out and stopped coming home for breakfast. Ethan trailed behind her, quieter than usual, his shoulders slumped under the weight of something heavier than guilt. "We need to talk," he said, "all of us, about how this is going to work." I gestured toward the couch. They sat together, carefully arranged like they were presenting a unified front, just like at the funeral. But this time, the cracks showed. Claire pulled out her legal pad. "I've been researching the will's terms. Dad was thorough, but if all parties agree, some clauses might be open to revision." "I don't agree," I said simply. "Mom, please," Claire said, her tone switching to something softer. "The financial burden is difficult. Michael just bought a new house. I still have law school debt, and Ethan." "I can't afford this," Ethan interrupted, his voice cracking. "My clinic's barely covering rent. I had to let go of my assistant." "Then you'll make sacrifices," I said calmly, "like your father and I did for all of you." Gabriel wiped a tear quickly from his cheek. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I didn't mean to at the funeral. I went along with them." I looked at my youngest, remembering the child who once crawled into bed during thunderstorms. And then I remembered him standing beside his siblings, nodding along as they publicly declared I should be cared for from a distance. "I remember too," I said, "and I remember who stayed silent." Their silence now filled the room once more. But this time I let it stretch. 6 months have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. I'm sitting here in the same navy dress I wore to the will reading, looking out the window of Brienne, with the home I chose to stay in, the home my children had hoped to relocate me from. The $8,000 arrives in my account like clockwork, every first of the month, transferred from Michael's business account, because he's the only one with cash flow to handle it. Claire sends her portion quarterly, tightening her already strained budget. Ethan had to sell his house and move into a 2-bedroom apartment to make his payments. They call every Sunday, all 3 of them on speakerphone. The conversations sound like scripted customer service calls, polite, efficient, emotionally vacant. They ask about my health, my needs, the weather. For the first 3 months, I let them perform. I let them think a steady paycheck and a weekly phone call would satisfy the requirements of care. Then, one Tuesday, I phoned Michael. "I need some help in the basement," I said, "just moving a few filing cabinets." He hesitated. "Can't you hire someone? I've got a board meeting." "There might be papers down there your father wanted you to see." He arrived in a suit, 30 minutes later, clearly irritated. I led him to 4 tall, dusty metal cabinets in the corner of the basement. Start with these. Sort through everything. Pull anything related to the business. It took him 6 hours. He missed his meeting. I brought him coffee and watched. Buried in one drawer, he found the original partnership agreement, a document that could shift the balance of control. His eyes lit up. "This changes everything," he said. "I could restructure." "What did you just call it?" I interrupted. "The company. I meant." "You meant to take over," I said. And I took the paper from his hands. That agreement went straight into my safe that evening. Alongside it, I added new documents I'd quietly gathered: insurance policies with unexpected beneficiaries, investment accounts none of them knew about, and real estate holdings hidden behind trust layers. Information is power. Claire's test came a month later. I called her office on a Friday. "I have a question about storm damage and my homeowner's insurance," I said. "Can you help?" "I don't specialize in that area, Mom," she replied. "You should talk to someone who does." "I'd prefer to keep it in the family," I said. "Unless, of course, your course." She arrived that night, briefcase in hand, and spent hours at my kitchen table, explaining policy details, coverage clauses, and state filing procedures. Afterward, she asked, "So what's the actual dispute?" "There isn't one," I said. "I just wanted to understand my options." She stared at me for a long moment, speechless. Then she opened her laptop and started drafting a legal brief. 47 pages later, I had a complete legal review of every policy in my name. And another reminder of what she could still do when properly motivated. Ethan's test was the hardest. I called him on Richard's death anniversary, told him I was lonely, asked if he could come over. He did, still in his scrubs, smelling faintly of antiseptic and dog fur. We spent the evening looking at old photos, flipping through albums of birthdays and vacations and Christmas mornings. At one point, he touched a photo of himself as a child. "I remember this," he said, "and I remember everything you did for us. I'm so sorry, Mom." I looked at him, my youngest, tears in his eyes. And I felt nothing. No forgiveness. No comfort. Only the quiet certainty that justice was finally being done. They continue the routine, my children. Every first of the month, the money arrives. Every Sunday, the phone calls come. They ask about my prescriptions, my meals, whether the furnace filter has been changed. They are careful now, so careful. But they still don't understand. This was never about the money. It was about what happens when people believe they can discard someone who spent her life holding them up. It was about showing them who they were when they thought no one was watching. They failed that test. Spectacularly. Now they live with the consequences. They pay for the privilege of maintaining a relationship with a mother who no longer loves them. They show up to prove they care, not because they do, but because a will demands it. They bring bakery treats and printed schedules, hoping structure can replace sincerity. But it doesn't. And it won't. Sometimes I catch them looking at me like they're waiting for softness, for forgiveness, for some sign that the old version of me still lives beneath the surface. But that woman is gone. She left when they stood in front of a room full of mourners and turned her into a checklist, when they looked at a grieving widow and saw a logistical problem to solve. What remains is someone who remembers. Who remembers every scraped knee she bandaged, every college essay she edited, every Christmas morning she made magical, every sacrifice. And who also remembers how easily they tried to erase her. Justice, it turns out, is expensive. But watching them pay month after month, year after year, just to sit across from someone they once thought they could manage from a distance, that is priceless.